Phrolova's been out for a while now, and since I've had the chance to test her out more extensively, I thought I'd deliver my more fleshed out thoughts on the character, and evaluate whether my pre-release pros and cons were accurate or not. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. For starters, I said that she would be bringing Cantarella into the meta, because finally, there will be a best in slot user for her. Yes, this did end up being the case. I would say that if you're somebody that was previously interested in Cantarella but basically had no reason to pull her, or if you're somebody that pulled for the Jellyfish Lady and just didn't really have a reason to use her much, Phrolova ended up being an excellent solution to her poor meta position. In terms of her hypercarry teams, the Jellyfish Lady is indeed her best in slot second slot teammate, as the Conductor is able to fully leverage the benefits of her kit. I would say that if you're a really big Cantarella fan, then yes, Phrolova is going to end up being a good pickup for you if you haven't got her already. She's breathed new life into her meta value, and she's went from a somewhat questionable pull to a character that is genuinely worth having. I would definitely recommend her if you're somebody that pulled for Cantarella but doesn't really feel like they have much use cases for her at the minute. As well, even though she is able to provide skill percent on outro, which does lend her to having other teams outside of her best in slot scenario, she's simply going to feel so much better in Phrolova teams, so I would definitely suggest her for such a reason. One thing I will add though, I don't actually think she really needs Cantarella, and I'll touch on that more later, but for now, just know that if you're somebody that doesn't really want Cantarella but you do want Phrolova, well then while it's undeniable that the Jellyfish Lady is indeed her absolute best partner in crime, there's definitely alternate solutions if you will, and we'll get onto that later. Another thing that I mentioned that I just don't agree with anymore is that she has decent accessibility. I said this because of String Master, but I just don't really think this is a fair statement, because her signature weapon ended up being a really big deal for her. Now don't get me wrong, it's pretty standard for a Wuthering Waves DPS to really want their limited 5-star signature weapon. This is nothing new, and basically every DPS in the game has a really big gap between their best in slot weapon and whatever their second best choice is. That's how it's always been. And the only two characters that really have a huge disparity in that regard would be Brant Wuthering Waves and Cardathea. But now we can add Phrolova to that list. Now I would like to say, String Master's power does still shine through, because it ends up being her second best weapon option, so if you don't have her Sig, yes, String Master is still definitely going to help you out here, but it's undeniable that her best weapon absolutely washes it. If you want to see this crazy Conductor's top performance in battle, you're gonna need her Sig. Now I would like to emphasize, as always, you don't need a character's absolute best weapon in order to clear TOA or just any other endgame content with them. Everything is clearable on budget options, provided that you have enough skill to make up for the lack of investment. But I don't necessarily think it's fair for me to say that she has decent accessibility because of her weapons, which is what I said before. Now what I will say is that she has decent accessibility in terms of her teams. It's time to talk about what I meant in regards to her not needing Cantarella. Yes, Triple Havoc is definitively her best in slot team. That includes herself, Cantarella, and Roccia. But with that being said, you don't need either of those characters. Because she's not a negative status unit, not having her definitive best in slot 5-star support doesn't really hurt her as much. Using Donjin Rover as a completely budget-friendly team, while it's definitely weaker than Premium Triple Havoc, it's still honestly quite good. And not only that, but you don't even have to play Phrolova as a DPS, because her outro skill provides pretty nice heavy attack buffing, meaning that you can literally use her as a second slot teammate for Phoebe or Gion. You are going to run into energy issues with Gion, so you want to build more energy on him than usual if you do end up using this pairing as your main Gion team. But in Phoebe's case, it actually ends up being quite competitive if you have Phrolova's signature weapon. Kuro cannot stop finding ways to buff up this acolyte, huh? But either way, you get the idea. She's not really that restricted in terms of teams, because there's actually a lot of different ways that you're able to use her. So unlike what I previously thought, she's actually not that inflexible when it comes to your team options. However, I wouldn't really say that she's accessible per se anymore. That would be disingenuous considering how really good her weapon is for her in particular. It is frankly to the point where she wants her signature weapon more than Brant wants his, and I would say that's a pretty dire line to cross. I will say, she's still good on other options, she will still clear, but it is undeniable that her top performance is definitely locked behind that signature. Another pro that I mentioned in regards to Phrolova would be that Roccia would actually be a character that is somewhat relevant in the meta now, actually having a best in slot team. While this is true, I was definitely too positive on the matter. This is because, while Roccia is indeed a good pull to make if you really want the best possible Phrolova team, she's still not really necessary, and you could argue that she's still not really worth the cost. And this is mostly because you can replace her with Shorekeeper, and you're really not going to miss out on that much performance. However, the difference is, Shorekeeper's a limited 5-star that is wanted by many other teams, so if you want to free her up for other comps, then suddenly pulling Roccia makes a lot more sense. The real issue of Sanhua was that was a free 4-star. There was genuinely no justifiable reason to pull an entire limited 5-star over using the free character. But in this case, at least it's another 5-star that is very contested. and it still does result in the overall best installed team synergy, because she's able to help buff up Cantarella in a triple Havoc team. I would say this: if you're somebody that pulled for Roccia already, then yes, Phrolova's definitely a good pickup. But I would say that if you're somebody that's still on the fence about getting Roccia or not, if you have Shorekeeper freed up, I don't really deem it necessary. Now, if your Shorekeeper is really busy, then once again, great pull to make. But it also depends on how much you really want to commit to Phrolova in particular, because let me remind you, Roccia is basically only going to be good for Phrolova. Sure, you can use her with Camellia, but like I said earlier, why don't you just use Sanhua instead in that case? So while she does have a genuine meta use case now, and I do think that if you're a big fan of the Clown Kid, there is definitely a reason to get her these days, I wouldn't go and say that she's completely saved or anything like that. Her value, considering how many limited pulls it takes to get a character, is still questionable considering that Shorekeeper exists. So bear that in mind. She is a good investment to make for the Triple Havoc team, but just consider whether you actually want her or not. I would say she's went from being just a simply redundant pull to being a luxury pull. So all around, her meta value did improve, but I'm hesitant to say that she's suddenly worth it if you lose your 50-50 and you have to go all the way. Another thing that I pointed out was that Phrolova had the potential to become the brand new best Havoc DPS in the entire game. Well, yes, this basically ended up happening. I mean, it was pretty predictable, to be honest. She's a 2.x character, and she's really freaking strong, and she has a great best installed team. Of course, she is the best Havoc DPS. If you're particularly interested in collecting a DPS of every element for whatever reason, then yes, she's your best bet if you care about Havoc. I would say that if you're a really big fan of crazy women, and you want to collect both Camellia and Phrolova, then don't worry because they don't eat each other's teammates. You can still very much have them coexist on one account. Because Camellia can take Sanhua and then Shorekeeper or Verena, while allowing Triple Havoc, or even Dungeon Havoc Rover, for your Phrolova. It's all around a fairly win-win situation. Though I will add that Camellia loses a lot less from not having her best installed weapon. A Camellia on Emerald of Genesis is not going to be losing as much for herself, as much as a Phrolova is going to be losing from not having her own signature weapon and running Cosmic Ripples. Granted, that could just be because Cosmic Ripples really isn't that good. Kuro, you did the standard rectifier pretty dirty. But either way, that's something that you can consider if you don't have enough to get Phrolova's signature weapon. I also mentioned that it would be interesting how she has unique mechanics. I would say this is pretty subjective. She does indeed have a unique playstyle, and I wouldn't really say that any other character in the game could do what she does in terms of how she feels to use. Her gameplay also feels super fluid. It doesn't really feel like you're having a rough time setting things up, and despite her having brand new mechanics and not relying on regular Resonance Liberation energy, she still feels very comfortable to use, to be honest with you. So I would say that if the whole gameplay gimmick of using a summon interests you, then yeah, I think Phrolova does that pretty well. One flaw that I mentioned would be that Phrolova's first rotation would be pretty weak because you would have to actually set up Hecate. I mean, yeah, this ended up being the case, but it's not really some crazy deal breaker. All it means is that your first rotation is going to feel a little bit slow, and then after that, you're going to be good to go. She does a lot of damage after that first rotation after all, so you're basically going to be fine. It's not really some major thing that you really need to dwell on, and I feel like this is only really going to be relevant to you if you seriously need a character that's good right from the get-go, but even her first rotation isn't the worst thing in the world. Once you have it over with, you're done, and it goes by pretty quickly, to be honest with you. And another flaw that I had mentioned is that her premium team is quite high cost. But like I said earlier, I feel like it's the opposite situation. Most Rectifier characters get by pretty well in Stringmaster, and that offsets a whole lot of their character cost. In Phrolova's case, it's her Sig that she really wants, and then she's quite flexible in terms of teammates, honestly. Now I do think that in principle, what I said does still hold true to an extent. What I mean by this is that whenever you pick up Cantarella and Roccia, you're getting them for Phrolova specifically. You're not really going to be able to apply them in other teams on your account. Well, with Cantarella you can, but more often than not, there's another replacement for her that does more buffing, or is less clunky to play, or something along those lines. Cantarella is rarely ever the best install pick, outside of Phrolova teams. And Roccia, we already know how tragic her tale is. She is just not worth it if you're not going for the triple Havoc team. Sanhua ended the Clown Kid's career before it even started. So I do still stand by the fact that if you intend to pull for those characters, just keep in mind that they're mostly going to be useful for Phrolova in particular, and if you ever decide to retire her, there's not really going to be anywhere else that you can use those supports. So just keep in mind that if you're going for Phrolova high investment, you're really locking in on her high investment in particular. It's not a triple fusion case where you can take your Brant Wuthering Waves or Changli and put them in some other teams and they'll do just fine. But I don't necessarily think that this problem is as bad, considering that she has cheaper options or just alternative options that do just fine for her. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Where do I currently think that Phrolova stands in the meta? I think she is definitely the definitive strongest Havoc character at the minute. If you really want to play Havoc and you want to play it in the best way possible, she's a great character to go for. But with that being said, I don't actually think that she's really a necessary pull by any means. If you already have quite a few DPSs, you don't need her. She's a good pickup for sure, and I do think she has some free-to-play friendly team options to her name. But I do think it's quite disappointing how she really wants that signature of hers in order to achieve her absolute top levels of performance. Overall, I'm quite happy with her meta position, and I think she's definitely a good pickup if you want her. That's a pretty good way to summarize it. But what are your thoughts about Phrolova? Does her meta position impress you? Or do you wish she was a little better? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a second channel where I just kind of cover whatever in regards to gacha games. Hopefully this video was able to tell you how good Phrolova actually is now that she's been out for a while. This has been Juice, signing out, and enjoy your Phrolova, folks.